The world first saw her as nothing more than the daughter of privilege, a girl born in luxury, raised behind the polished gates of wealth, where everything was planned, perfect, and predictable. But what no one saw coming was how quickly that perfect world would shatter the moment she met him. He wasn't from her world. His hands were rough, his clothes worn, his motorcycle louder than her father's approval would ever allow. Yet when their eyes met, something inside her broke free, a feeling she had never known before, the taste of freedom. Her father, a man who controlled everything, her future, her friends, even her smile, saw him as nothing but danger on two wheels. A mistake, he called him. But she didn't see danger. She saw honesty. She saw a man who didn't hide behind money, who lived wild and fearless, who made her feel alive for the first time. So one night, when the rain began to fall and the city lights blurred like tears, she made a choice that would shake everything she'd ever known. She packed a single bag, left a note on the marble table, and ran into the storm, straight toward the sound of his motorcycle. When the sun rose the next morning, her father's mansion was filled with silence and disbelief. Reporters swarmed the gates, the story spreading faster than fire. "Billionaire's daughter runs away with a biker," screamed the headlines. To the world, it was scandal. To her father, it was betrayal. But to her, it was liberation. She didn't care about the judgment, the cameras, or the whispers. For once, she wasn't living a script someone else had written. She was writing her own story, 1 mile at a time. As they rode together through the endless highways, she felt the world fall away. The noise, the expectations, the weight of being perfect. The wind tangled her hair, the roar of the engine drowned out her fears, and for the first time, she wasn't just her father's daughter. She was her own person. But what she didn't know was that her escape had set off a chain of events far beyond what she imagined. Because while she was discovering who she truly was, her father was discovering something he had long forgotten: what love really means. By the time the world learned what he did next, millions had already taken sides. Some called him heartless. Others called him a hero. But no one could deny one thing. The moment her father's reaction was caught on camera, it changed everything. And what began as a story of rebellion became something far deeper, a lesson about freedom, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways love finds us, even when we think we've lost everything. The road stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of silver cutting through the dawn. Her hands clung tightly around his waist as the motorcycle thundered down the empty highway, the world rushing by in a blur of wind and adrenaline. Every mile between them and her father's mansion felt like another chain breaking free. She wasn't sure what lay ahead: danger, regret, or salvation, but she knew one thing for certain: she was never going back. For the first time in her life, her heart was beating for herself, not for expectations or appearances. The biker, whose name was Cole, didn't speak much. His eyes stayed on the road, but his silence wasn't cold. It was steady, protective. He had seen the way her world had looked at him, the way her father's men had cornered him before, treating him like filth for daring to love beyond his class. But love wasn't something you earned with money. It was something you felt in your bones. And as the miles passed, he felt her trust settle into his heartbeat. She was fragile, but fierce, terrified, yet brave enough to leave everything behind. Behind them, the world erupted. News anchors speculated wildly. Her father's PR team went into crisis mode, and social media turned their story into a storm of opinions. Some called her foolish, some romantic, but none of them knew the truth. None of them saw the way her father's wealth had caged her spirit, how every yes, daddy, had chipped away at who she was. And none of them understood how one man with nothing could offer her everything she had been starving for: truth, simplicity, and freedom. But her father was not a man to accept defeat. His anger wasn't just about his daughter's disappearance. It was about control slipping through his fingers. He hired investigators, offered rewards, and within days, he had eyes on them. Cameras spotted the couple at a gas station on the outskirts of Nevada, and within hours, the story exploded again. Runaway heiress and biker spotted on the road. The image went viral, and her father made a decision that would shock everyone. Instead of hunting them down quietly, he went public. At a press conference broadcast across the nation, the billionaire stood behind a podium, his expression calm, but his voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Wherever you are," he said, looking directly into the camera, "come home. You're my daughter. I forgive you. But that man, he paused, his tone sharpening, will never be part of this family. The words burned through every television and phone screen, reaching them where they sat that night under the stars. She didn't cry, but her silence spoke louder than tears ever could. Cole turned off the small radio beside the campfire, the static fading into the crackle of burning wood. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The father's voice still hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. She wrapped her arms around her knees, staring into the flames. He'll never understand, she whispered. To him, love is just another business transaction. Cole looked at her then, not with pity, but with quiet conviction. Then we'll show him what real love looks like, he said. His voice was rough, but there was a gentleness in it that made her heart ache. The next few days were a blur of small towns and long rides. They stayed in motels, ate diner food, and talked about everything. Her dreams, his past, the worlds they had both escaped from. He told her about his life before the bike. A soldier who came home to nothing, who built his world from the ruins. When I met you, he said one night, I didn't see a rich girl. I saw someone just as lost as me. She smiled faintly, realizing that maybe, for the first time, she wasn't someone's possession, she was someone's equal. But as their bond deepened, the world around them grew more dangerous. Her father's private investigators weren't giving up. One night, as they stopped at a diner off the interstate, Cole noticed a black SUV parked across the road. The men inside weren't locals. He felt it in his gut. We need to go, he whispered. She didn't question it. Minutes later, the bike roared back to life, disappearing into the night. Behind them, headlights followed. The chase was on. They weaved through the desert roads, the roar of the engine mixing with the pounding of their hearts. She held tighter, feeling the wind tear through her hair, the world narrowing to a single sound, the relentless rhythm of the road beneath them. He won't stop, she shouted over the noise. Then neither will we, Cole replied. And for that moment, nothing else existed but the road, the stars, and two souls running from a world that never wanted them together. Hours later, when they finally stopped near an old service station far from the main highway, she looked at him, her eyes shining with exhaustion and defiance. I'd do it all again, she said softly, even if it means losing everything. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, You haven't lost anything. You've just started living. But what neither of them knew was that back home, her father's heart was beginning to shift. The man who had once only seen control was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in years, fear. Not of losing power, but of losing his daughter forever. Back in his mansion, her father sat alone in his study, the walls filled with silence thicker than the marble floors could carry. The screens in front of him showed footage from news outlets, grainy images of his daughter smiling on the back of a motorcycle, her hair dancing in the wind. She looked different, free, alive. He didn't recognize that version of her, and that terrified him more than her disappearance. For years, he had measured love in terms of safety, in control, in keeping her within the golden cage he had built. Now he was realizing that in protecting her from pain, he had also protected her from life. He picked up the phone to call his head of security, but hesitated. His reflection in a glass window looked older, smaller, broken by the weight of his own mistakes. She's my daughter, he whispered to himself, but maybe she's not my prisoner. Still, old habits die hard. Within hours, he dispatched another team to track her down. This time, however, there was something different in his tone, less rage, more desperation. Find her, he said, but don't hurt him. Don't touch the boy. It was the first time he referred to Cole as more than that biker. Something in him was beginning to unravel, and though he wouldn't admit it yet, it wasn't anger driving him anymore. It was guilt. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Cole and the girl found refuge in a small mountain town, hidden beneath pine trees and fog. They stayed in a cabin owned by one of his old biker brothers, a man named Ray, who'd left the road behind years ago. You picked a hell of a storm to fall in love, Ray said with a laugh, pouring coffee into tin cups. You sure you're ready for the ride that comes after? Cole only smiled, his hand resting gently over hers. We already left everything behind. There's no going back now. But in the quiet of the night, when the world slept, doubt crept into her mind. She thought about her father, about the hurt she must have caused him. She wasn't sure if he was angry, heartbroken, or simply disappointed. Every part of her wanted to believe he would understand someday. But another part knew that forgiveness wasn't something that came easily to a man who'd built his entire life on control. She sat by the window, watching the rain fall, whispering to herself, "He doesn't need to forgive me. I just need him to let me go." Outside, the rain turned to snow, the soft flakes covering the world in silence. Cole watched her from across the room, seeing the storm behind her calm eyes. He didn't try to fix it. He just walked over, wrapped his arms around her, and whispered, "Sometimes, freedom hurts before it heals." She nodded, leaning into him, knowing he was right. And somewhere deep down, she also knew that her father's lesson was far from over. The story was just beginning to twist in ways none of them could yet imagine. The next morning, the quiet mountain town woke to chaos. A news van had arrived, followed by flashing lights and the distant sound of engines. Her father's private jet had landed nearby, and his team had finally tracked them down. Cole looked out the cabin window and saw men in suits stepping out of black cars. "They found us," he muttered. She froze, her pulse quickening, fear and defiance colliding in her chest. "We can't run forever," she whispered. Cole turned to her, his jaw tightening. "Then maybe it's time we stop running." Minutes later, her father stepped out of the car, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud, his face pale beneath the gray morning sky. He looked around, his eyes scanning until they landed on her. For a moment, the world went silent. No cameras, no bodyguards, no noise, just a father seeing his daughter not as a possession, but as a person for the first time. She stood there, trembling but unafraid, her hands still in Cole's. "You came all this way to bring me home?" she asked softly. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "No," he said. "I came to see if you were happy." It was the first honest sentence he had spoken in years. The words hit her like lightning. She wanted to hate him for everything, for his control, his arrogance, his blindness. But in that moment, all she saw was a man terrified of being left behind by his own child. "I am," she said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I am." Tears welled in his eyes, the weight of his pride finally collapsing under the truth. "I thought I was keeping you safe," he whispered, "but I was only keeping you from living." Cole stepped forward, ready to defend her if needed, but her father raised a hand, not in anger, but in surrender. "You don't owe me anything," he said, looking at Cole with a mixture of pain and respect. "But take care of her. Not because I say so, but because she chose you." Cole nodded once, firm and certain. "I already am." It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was a promise. As the snow fell quietly around them, something changed forever in that frozen mountain air. There were no apologies, no grand speeches, no cinematic reconciliation. Just three people standing in the truth. That love, in all its forms, demands risk. Her father turned to leave, his shoes crunching against the snow, and as he walked away, she whispered, "Thank you." He didn't look back, but he smiled. And that was enough. Days passed after that unexpected encounter, but its echo lingered in all three of them. The girl couldn't shake the image of her father's trembling hands, his eyes wet with guilt and pride all at once. It was the first time she had seen him not as the untouchable businessman the world worshipped, but as a man, fragile, flawed, and afraid. That moment had cracked something inside her, not with pain, but with understanding. Freedom wasn't just running away. It was forgiving the ones who try to cage you because they didn't know any better. Cole noticed the quiet that had settled over her since that day. They still rode through the long open roads, the world passing in flashes of sun and wind, but her thoughts were somewhere far away. One night, as they sat by a lake surrounded by tall pines, he reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to forget where you came from," he said softly. "You just have to decide where you're going." She looked at him then, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and the storm inside her. "I don't hate him anymore," she whispered. "I just wish he'd taught me love without control." Cole nodded slowly. "Then maybe now, you can teach him." Back in the city, her father was changing too, though few believed it. His empire ran like clockwork, but for the first time, he wasn't present at every board meeting. He spent his evenings walking through the city without bodyguards, passing faces he'd never noticed before. He saw the struggling single mother on the subway, the tired old man sweeping the sidewalk, the young couple holding hands despite having nothing. For years, he had built walls to keep people out, believing it was strength. Now, he realized it had only made him blind. One afternoon, he found himself driving to the edge of town where a group of bikers gathered for a charity ride. He watched from a distance as they handed out food and jackets to the homeless. Among them was Cole, his leather jacket worn, his voice calm, his actions humble. It wasn't the reckless outlaw he had imagined. It was a man leading with quiet strength. For a long time, the father just stood there, unseen, his heart heavy with the irony of it all. The man he had once despised was teaching him what it truly meant to protect someone. That night, he returned home and sat alone in his study. The gold-framed photo of his daughter still sat on his desk, from the days before she ran away. But this time, he didn't see the disobedient child who broke his heart. He saw a woman who had taught him how to heal his own. She found her road, he murmured to the empty room. Now I have to find mine. For the first time in years, he turned off the light before going to bed, not out of defeat, but out of peace. Months later, the girl received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's, firm but shaky at the edges. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. My dearest, it began, I won't ask you to come home. Because now I understand that home is not a place. It's where your soul breathes freely. But if you ever decide to visit, the gates will be open. Not to keep you in, but to welcome you back. She didn't realize she was crying until the ink began to blur. Cole, watching quietly from across the room, walked over and pulled her close. Looks like he found his way, he whispered. She nodded, pressing the letter to her chest. And I think I finally found mine too. Together, they decided to return, not to stay, but to face what they had both run from. When they arrived at the mansion, the air felt different. There were no guards at the gate, no reporters, no tension. Just her father, standing at the door, older but lighter somehow, as though the years had finally taught him humility. He didn't speak. Neither did she. They simply embraced, the kind of embrace that says everything words can't. Cole watched from a few steps back, his hand resting over his heart, silently grateful to witness something that rare, a family learning to love again. After the reunion, her father invited them inside. Gone were the grand speeches and the heavy silence that once filled the marble halls. Instead, he poured coffee, just like any ordinary father would. So, he said quietly, glancing at Cole, "Do you still ride that death machine?" Cole chuckled, nodding. "Every day." Her father smiled faintly. "Good. Keep her safe on it." It wasn't a command. It was a surrender, the most powerful kind. As the afternoon faded into golden light, they sat together in the garden, where the air smelled of jasmine and new beginnings. Her father listened as she told stories of the road, of laughter, storms, and small victories. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, really listened, for the first time in her life. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Love doesn't always show up the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's messy, delayed, imperfect, but it still finds a way home. That night, when they left the mansion, her father stood at the gates watching them go. The roar of the motorcycle filled the air again, but this time, it wasn't the sound of rebellion. It was the sound of balance, of two worlds finally learning to exist together. She turned her head slightly as they rode off and saw her father raise his hand, not in anger or farewell, but in blessing. The wind caught her tears as they disappeared into the horizon, carrying with them the story of a girl who ran away to be free, and a father who had to lose her to understand what freedom truly meant. The city faded behind them, replaced by open roads and skies painted in the deep orange of dusk. The sound of the motorcycle was steady and comforting, a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of her new life. She leaned against Cole's back, the wind brushing against her face, her father's final gesture still fresh in her mind. For the first time, she didn't feel torn between two worlds. She didn't have to choose between love and family, between freedom and belonging. Somewhere between those miles of asphalt and silence, she had learned that peace wasn't about escaping the past. It was about making peace with it. They stopped by a lonely gas station just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Cole filled the tank while she wandered toward the edge of the lot, where the vast desert stretched endlessly. "You okay?" he asked when he joined her. She nodded, smiling softly. "I used to think running away was the only way to feel alive," she said. "But I was wrong. It wasn't the running, it was the choosing. For once in my life, I chose something for me." Cole slipped his arm around her shoulders, his voice quiet but certain. "And you chose right." Later that night, They stayed at a small roadside motel. The room smelled of coffee and rain, the kind of place where time seemed to stop. She sat by the window, looking out at the wet highway, reflecting on everything that had led her there. She remembered her father's anger, her fear, the flashing cameras, and the noise of the world judging her. But above all, she remembered that moment on the mountain when her father's voice cracked and his pride fell away. That was the turning point, not just for him, but for her too. It proved that love, even when broken, could still heal. Cole watched her in silence, reading the thoughts behind her eyes. You know, he said, most people spend their whole lives chasing something: money, fame, approval. But you walked away from all of it and found yourself. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's what my father taught me in the end. You can't own someone you love. You can only hope they find what makes them whole. Cole leaned closer, brushing a kiss against her temple. And you did. The rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle. She closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder, the steady sound of the road calling them again. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect or easy, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. Somewhere out there, she knew her father was looking up at the same sky, wondering where she was, maybe even smiling. Because for the first time in both their lives, they understood the same truth. Love wasn't about holding on. It was about letting go, without losing connection. Weeks later, a video surfaced online that no one expected. It wasn't another tabloid scandal or paparazzi clip. It was something entirely different. Her father stood behind a podium again, the same way he had months earlier, but this time there was no anger in his voice. I once thought protecting someone meant keeping them close, he said. But my daughter taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting them find their own road. The clip went viral overnight, not because of who he was, but because of the truth behind his words. The billionaire who had once been ridiculed for losing control had become a symbol of redemption. When she saw the video, she cried. Not from sadness, but from pride. She had never wanted to shame him, only to be seen by him. And now, the whole world could finally see what she had always hoped for, that people could change. Cole watched beside her, his arm draped around her shoulders. He did it, he murmured. He finally got it. She smiled through tears. Yeah, she said softly. He finally understands what love really means. That night, they rode into the desert again, the moon guiding their way. The air was cool and clear, and the stars looked close enough to touch. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was running from something, but towards something. Where to next? Cole asked, glancing over his shoulder. She laughed. Anywhere. Everywhere. As long as it's with you. And with that, the engine roared to life, carrying them into the unknown, free and unafraid. Back in the city, her father watched another video, this time, of his daughter on the back of that same motorcycle. The footage had been captured by a stranger at a rest stop, the caption reading, "The runaway heiress found happiness her own way." He smiled, leaning back in his chair. There was no bitterness anymore, no ache of loss. Only pride. Because she hadn't run away from him, she had run toward herself. And that was all a father could ever truly wish for. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere beyond those glowing streets, he imagined the sound of a motorcycle echoing in the distance, a sound that once symbolized rebellion, now transformed into peace. "Ride safe, sweetheart," he whispered to the night. And though the world would never hear it, she somehow did, carried on the wind, reminding her that love never really lets go. It just learns to follow wherever the road leads. Months passed, and the girl's life on the open road became a rhythm of freedom and discovery. She and Cole traveled through towns and deserts, the wind whipping around them, carrying with it a sense of possibility she had never known within the walls of her father's mansion. She met people who lived on their own terms, artists, travelers, and those who had been judged for choices society didn't understand. Each encounter reminded her that life wasn't about perfection or wealth. It was about courage, connection, and authenticity. And with every mile, she felt more herself than she ever had. Her father, too, was changing. The viral video of his honest confession and recognition of his daughter's independence spread beyond social media. It reached hearts. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers wrote to him, praising the humility and growth he had displayed. He began to understand that control is not love, And protection is not ownership. Slowly, he started to see the world through her eyes. That letting go could be the greatest gift a parent could give. And though he missed her presence, he realized that distance no longer meant separation. It meant trust. Back on the road, the girl and Cole stopped at a small diner in a quiet town. She watched him interact with locals, offering help, listening, and laughing. He wasn't just her companion. He was a guide in life, teaching her the lessons only someone who had struggled, fallen, and rebuilt themselves could. She realized that love wasn't just a feeling. It was an action, a choice every day, and something you proved with integrity, kindness, and trust. She had thought leaving her father meant losing family, but instead, she had discovered a new definition of it. Late that night, under a sky scattered with stars, they camped on a hill overlooking a valley. She stared at the horizon, the wind carrying the scent of pine and freedom. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she whispered. Cole smiled and took her hand. "This is what happens when you choose your own path," he said. "You don't live for approval anymore. You live for yourself." And in that moment, she understood. True freedom isn't about running from someone else. It's about embracing who you really are. Far away, in his study overlooking the city, her father looked at the same stars through a window, imagining where she might be. He didn't feel fear or anger anymore. Instead, there was hope. Hope that she was safe, happy, and thriving. And in that hope, he realized the most important lesson of all. Love is not control. It is faith in the people you care about, even when they walk paths you cannot follow. The world continued to watch as stories of their journey spread online. Pictures of the girl on Cole's bike, riding through mountains, deserts, and coastal roads, smiling freely, laughing with a joy that could not be contained. People marveled, not at her wealth, but at her courage to leave everything behind and forge a life that was hers alone. Cole remained quietly at her side, a protector and partner, showing that love could be both fierce and steady, passionate yet grounded. Together, they embodied the kind of freedom many only dreamed of. Back in the city, her father's image appeared in news reports, not as a harsh businessman, but as a parent transformed by understanding. His willingness to let go and acknowledge his daughter's choices had gone viral. People saw the power and humility in recognizing that love sometimes means stepping back. It was a lesson millions absorbed, that letting someone live authentically is the truest gift you can give. And even though he still longed for her presence, he found peace in seeing her happiness. The girl, riding once more beneath the vast sky, felt the wind in her hair and the engine beneath her as more than just motion. It was liberation. Every mile was a heartbeat, every horizon a promise that she was finally writing her own story. She had left behind the gilded cage, yet found a family she chose for herself. Cole, the riders who had guided them once, and the lessons of courage, independence, and love that would never fade. At the same time, her father walked the quiet halls of his mansion, reflecting on what he had learned. The sound of the motorcycle's roar on distant roads reached his ears like a memory, reminding him that true connection does not require proximity, and true love does not require ownership. He realized he had gained something unexpected, a daughter who could teach him humility, patience, and the enduring power of freedom. As night fell across the country, the girl and Cole disappeared into the horizon, engines echoing across open roads, leaving behind a world that would remember their story. A story not of rebellion or wealth, but of courage, trust, and the beauty of forging your own path. And somewhere far away, a father smiled, knowing that the person she had become was far greater than anything he could have ever planned. Theirs was a journey that proved life's most profound truths. Freedom, love, and understanding often come in the moments we least expect, and happiness is earned by choosing yourself boldly, without apology. Some stories aren't just about what happens. They're about what they teach us. This one, of a rich girl who ran away with a biker and a father learning to let go, reminds us that life is rarely controlled by wealth or power. True freedom comes from the courage to follow your heart, even when the world expects you to stay confined. It shows that love is not possession. It's trust, respect, and the bravery to release those we care about so they can find themselves. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from letting go rather than holding on. Her journey proves that happiness isn't found in safety or approval. It's found in authenticity. When we dare to step outside the expectations imposed upon us, when we choose ourselves over perfection or conformity, we discover the strength we didn't know we had. The biker, the ride, the open road, all became symbols of choice and empowerment. And for her father, the experience became a mirror, reflecting the difference between control and true love, authority and understanding, fear and faith in someone you care about. The story also reminds us that transformation is possible at any age. The daughter found herself, the father found humility, and even those watching from afar learned something profound. Relationships thrive not when we dominate, but when we respect and trust one another. Courage isn't only about facing the unknown. It's about accepting change, embracing vulnerability, and opening your heart to lessons that life delivers in unexpected ways. As you reflect on this story, think about your own life. Are there moments where fear or pride have kept you from following your heart? Are there relationships where letting go could lead to understanding and growth? Sometimes, the bravest act we can take is to release control and trust the journey. Because in doing so, we create the space for love, freedom, and true connection to flourish. If this story inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might help someone else see the courage they already possess. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge, move, and inspire, and leave a like if you believe that life is about daring to follow your own path. Because in the end, the world remembers not those who held on too tightly, but those who had the courage to ride toward freedom and trust in love.